Welcome to my channel, The Binge Eating Therapist. I'm Sarah, former binge eater turned psychotherapist, and my mission is to use this space to bring content to you to help you understand your struggle with food and break free from binge eating. And today I want to talk about binge urges. Ultimately, these are right at the crux of binge eating and binge eating disorder. Because let's face it, if you didn't have the urge to binge, then you wouldn't binge. So by an urge, what I'm talking about is like a visceral feeling that's accompanied by some thoughts and some beliefs around what this feeling means. And the thoughts will often just be experienced as a really strong, intense desire to eat a load of food. So first of all, I just want to kind of divide them up into two types of urges. You've got one that's going to be hunger driven. So if you are restricting, your urges may be driven by biological hunger. If that's the case, you can get in a fight with them, but at no point are they going to diminish or change because they're being driven by your biology, and your biology is not going to give up on you. And then there's the other kind of urges that are not driven by hunger, they're driven by emotional thoughts, triggers of situations, habits, all kinds of other things as well. Might think of it almost like a mental hunger, and this video is about those urges. So first of all, you need to be feeding yourself for you to be able to tell the difference between the two urges and figure this stuff out. So when I was really in the depths of very chaotic binging and I was looking for a solution, I found an NLP and hypnosis guy who worked in Harley Street in London, and he was guaranteeing results in one session to cure bulimia and binge eating. And if it didn't work in one session, he would offer a couple more sessions free of charge. And then if he couldn't cure you, you got your money back. Now, it was a lot of money, especially for me at the time. But I thought, you know what, it's definitely worth this money to get rid of this eating disorder. And if it doesn't work, I get my money back. So why not? So I went for this session, and I remember during the consultation, he was asking me some questions about my experience, and I remember telling him that when these urges came, that I was powerless. I couldn't stop myself from acting on this urge to binge. Like, all sense of any self-control was out of the window. I just couldn't stop. And he was like, well, that's not really true, is it? You could stop. And I was like, no, my experience is I really can't when I'm in that situation. And he said, yeah, but if you were about to binge and then someone was breaking into your house, do you think you'd be able to stop in that situation? I was like, well, okay, sure, but it's just going to come back, And I think this is one of the distressing things I think a lot of people experience about binge urges, is maybe they have a bit of success in managing their urges or even riding them out, but it feels like they just keep coming back. And particularly with distraction techniques that are often taught, go and have a bath, go for a walk, all that kind of stuff, which I just used to find extremely patronising and just not what I wanted to do. When I've got an urge to binge, I want to binge. I don't want to sit in a bath. And my experience was that, okay, even if I had an urge and I didn't act on it for whatever reason, yes, it would diminish, but then it would come back. So this story that I had around my urges was, they're gonna get me eventually. Like, they're gonna get me. So like, what is the point of like suffering through these urges when they've got me in their grasp? And it just felt like I didn't have the power or the self-control to do anything about it. And the NLP stuff, it didn't work. And he was so confident that it would work. And I kind of believed him at the time as well. So I maybe had about a week binge free before it came back. And I never went back. I never went back for another session, and I never went back to get my money back because of his confidence, I blamed myself. I blamed myself that my binge eating wasn't cured in one session. And that feels really sad to think about now. But yeah, I internalized it, and it just built on that pile of shame that I was feeling, that I couldn't figure this stuff out. And there seems to be this pervasive belief out there that recovery from binge eating means getting rid of all urges to binge. Like, that's what recovery looks like. And for me, the longest time I held on to that. So I would sometimes have a week or two where I didn't binge and I didn't have particularly strong urges to binge. And every time this happened, I'd kind of forget how powerful the binge urge was. And I would think, yes, I'm recovered. I've got it this time. There's no way I'm going to go back to binging. I'm just going to remember how good it feels not to binge. And then at some point, sometimes seemingly without a recognizable trigger, I'd be hit with an urge to binge, and just experiencing that urge made me feel like I'd already failed. You know, so there was this catastrophization that came along with the urge. Now, that belief that recovery means getting rid of urges makes a huge amount of sense, because the alternative is pretty scary. Because what's the alternative? The alternative is what you're supposed to live and fight with your binge urges for the rest of your life. So I suppose what I would want to share is that I still get urges to binge. I'm not going to get in a fight with them. And so I want to share with you like a couple of things that you can do in order to change your relationship with the urge itself. We talk about changing our relationship to food all the time, but there's a sensation that comes before the binge, and we need to understand and almost, if we can't make friends, at least accept that sensation, because if we can't manage it and if we can't tolerate it, it will always control us, and then freedom's just gonna continue to elude us. So the first thing when it comes to understanding and managing your urges to binge is to look at the belief system around them. So a lot of practitioners, when they work with binge eating, they'll use food diaries and they'll ask you to like write down what you were thinking before you binged. And this I always found extremely unhelpful, because me, and I hear it from a lot of people as well, they're like, I'm not thinking anything. All it is an overwhelming desire to eat, an overwhelming desire to binge, and I'm not thinking anything. It's like my thinking has switched off. So then this idea, they're being told that thoughts are supposed to drive the binge eating, but they're saying I'm not having any thoughts. I think we need to take it down a notch. It's the beliefs that are driving the binge eating. So beliefs are not necessarily experienced in the moment as like a constructed sentence. I believe I am going to binge because. It's more like just a belief structure that's holding something up. So I'll tell you some of my beliefs, and hopefully some of them will resonate with you. So one belief that I think really kept me stuck for a long time is that belief that this feeling is never going to go anywhere until I binge. That binging is the only way to get rid of this feeling. That belief system meant that when that feeling came, oh my goodness, this feeling means that I'm going to binge, and it felt inevitable, which kind of like is the next belief, that belief that this feeling means it's inevitable, you're going to binge. Because if you're feeling it and you're believing it's inevitable, well then at that point it is inevitable. So the belief and the story just keeps playing out and just keeps getting reinforced and cemented. Another belief which I touched on briefly was this idea that binge urge is going to get me eventually. Like the fact that I keep having these urges, if I resist today, it's just going to come back tomorrow. It's just going to keep coming back. And so when we start identifying the story that we're telling ourselves around this feeling, around this urge, really helps to see what's the cognitive part that's driving it. And we need to try and cast doubt on that story, because for as long as you believe all those things, you will keep playing them out, right? So the belief that this feeling isn't going to go anywhere is also accompanied by a judgment value, and that is a terrible thing. But what if it's like, this is just a feeling and it feels a bit uncomfortable, but it's okay that I'm feeling this. It doesn't mean I have to act on this. It doesn't mean it's not going to go away. So there's something about being able to identify these thoughts or these beliefs and being able to question them, because it's the fact that you believe them that makes them true, because the fact you believe them means your behaviour will reflect the belief. So first of all, really understanding like, what are the ones for you? What might they be? And then the next thing is about finding the urge in your body. Now, binge eating is all about disconnection. People who struggle with binge eating tend to have a really poor relationship with their body, but we need to find the sensation in your body. Where is it? For some people, it's low down in their stomach. For others, it's higher up in their solar plexus. Others, like me, it was kind of like in my chest. It felt like a weight here. Some people, it's up in their throat, and other people even in their head, and maybe somewhere else. Please share if you've got you experience it differently, because I think people do experience it differently. But when we can identify the sensation in our body, like what does this actually feel like, this urge, and where is it, we start to realize, or hopefully we realize, that yes, it feels uncomfortable, but it doesn't feel terrible until we wrap our beliefs and our story around it, which makes it feel terrible. Normally, it's like an agitation or a tightness, tension or heaviness or something like that, like being able to find it and then just breathe into it. Like make friends with the physical sensation, or at least accept the physical sensation. Because the point is we get into a conflict with it, and this feeling arises, and we're like, our story is activated, and then we have this urgency. That's where the urge part comes. We experience this urgency to change whatever it is that's going on in the moment, change our emotional state, feel better in some way, even though part of us knows that long term we're going to feel worse. But if we can identify how our body experiences it and just pay attention and connect with it, we start to have a different experience than when we're not really aware of it. We are experiencing it in our body, but we're not aware of it because we're caught up in our head with our story. And then the third part is kind of bringing those first two together and being able to wake up the observer. So if we think of us like we're a bundle of conditioning and of taught beliefs and experiences, and there's so much around what we've experienced that makes up our world, right? And so if we take this, but we're these conditioned animals with no free will, we're always going to be run by our thoughts and our feelings. And so I think of the observer part, this idea that we have the capacity to step back and watch the mind think, and watch and experience what's going on in the body from an observer point of view. Because when you're in that urge to binge, you are in it. You're in your thoughts, believing them. You're believing this feeling is terrible. You are right in it and identified with the experience. And this idea of kind of creating a bit of distance so that we can observe and we can watch the mind doing what it does. So often we judge our thoughts, and then we make our thoughts mean things as well. And for me, that observer part, that is the root of free will. The fact that we have this capacity to kind of go, oh, I recognise that I'm believing this, or I recognise I'm feeling this. In that sentence, there are two I's. There's the I who's recognising and the I who's having the experience. So that capacity to no longer be identified with your thoughts. They're not you. And particularly with a binge urge, where it's so familiar, it's just an old pattern being activated. When we can step back and watch it, it feels a bit uncomfortable, but it does not feel terrible. And when we can get to that point, then we don't need the binge urges to go away. If we think recovery means that binge urges have to go away, then we're always at the mercy of should they decide to return one day. But if we know that a binge urge, we can experience it and it's just an uncomfortable experience, and we know our mind's going to catastrophize, and we just let it. There's a part of us that's not just our mind. And that, I think, is the key to getting out of any compulsivity. When we're in it and in our experience, we're run by our feelings. We're run by these automatic thoughts. So I'll leave you with that for today, and I will see you on the next video.